You don't have to fight toxic people. You don't have to block, argue, or chase peace. Because the moment you master this one inner secret, they begin to leave your life on their own. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." Toxic relationships are not just about others. They are also about what you unconsciously tolerate, attract, or avoid. It's not always about being too nice, too trusting, or too forgiving. It's often about something far deeper, a part of yourself you've rejected, a wound you never looked at, a hidden piece of your identity you were taught to suppress. This is the shadow. The shadow is everything you've been told not to be. Too loud, too proud, too selfish, too angry, too sensitive, too much, or not enough. And here's the truth. When you don't face your shadow, you attract people who embody it for you. You end up surrounded by manipulators, bullies, or emotional vampires, because your unconscious is trying to wake you up. This isn't magic. It's psychology. And the more unconscious you are of your own shadow, the more power toxic people have over you. So what's the secret? It's not about controlling others. It's about reclaiming the parts of you that you were taught to fear. When you do that, something changes. You stop being available for manipulation. You stop being predictable. You stop being easy to read. And without even trying, toxic people begin to disappear. Toxic people don't choose their victims randomly. They're incredibly attuned to one thing: unconscious shame. They sense where you're insecure. They feel where you overcompensate. They know, often without words, what part of you you're secretly hiding. And they use it. If you're afraid of being disliked, they'll withhold approval. If you hate confrontation, they'll push your boundaries. If you crave validation, they'll give just enough to keep you hooked, then take it away. But here's the truth. They can only use what you haven't accepted in yourself. Carl Jung believed that we all have a dark, rejected side, the shadow. And when we don't integrate it, we become fragmented. We try to live only through the parts of ourselves we were praised for. The good child, the helper, the strong one, the one who never complains. But when you suppress your anger, your assertiveness, your wildness, your truth, someone else will show up in your life to mirror it for you. Not to destroy you, but to show you what you've disowned. That's why simply cutting off toxic people doesn't always work. Because until you reclaim your shadow, someone new will come to take their place. The real shift happens inside. When you own your voice. When you allow yourself to be powerful, not just pleasing. When you stop being afraid of your full self. That's when manipulation loses its grip. Not because others change, but because you do. You don't even need to say anything. No confrontation, no explanation, no dramatic speech. When you begin to integrate your shadow, they feel it. The dynamic shifts. You're no longer easy to guilt. You don't rush to fix. You don't shrink when someone disapproves. And most importantly, you're not afraid of being misunderstood anymore. Toxic people thrive on control, but they lose interest the moment you stop needing their approval. Because the most powerful boundary isn't something you say, it's something you are. It's the quiet confidence of someone who no longer abandons themselves. And here's the paradox. When you stop trying to be good all the time, you become whole. Not perfect, real. And realness is something manipulation can't survive in. Carl Jung believed that true healing isn't about becoming better. It's about becoming whole. That means making space for both your light and your darkness, your compassion and your rage, your care and your clarity. When you embody this kind of presence, toxic people don't see a target. They see a wall. Not one made of fear, but of self-possession. And this is what we're here to explore. So if this resonates with you so far, if you're starting to feel something awaken within you, make sure you're subscribed. Because we're not here to just talk about psychology. We're here to reclaim your power. Here's what no one tells you. When you finally begin to integrate your shadow, you become less likable to the wrong people. And that's exactly the point. People who depended on your silence will say you've changed. People who relied on your guilt will say you're selfish. People who fed off your insecurity will say you're arrogant. But it's not arrogance. It's alignment. You're no longer bending yourself to avoid conflict. You're no longer shrinking to stay safe. You're no longer betraying yourself to be accepted. And it disturbs those who once depended on your self-abandonment. At first, this can feel lonely. You may question yourself. Am I being too harsh? Have I lost my kindness? Why does standing up for myself feel so wrong? But this is exactly what Carl Jung meant when he said, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." You are not becoming worse. You're becoming real. You're no longer addicted to being the nice one, because you realize that kindness without boundaries isn't kindness. It's compliance. And the more whole you become, the more manipulative people opt out of your life. You don't need to push them away. They sense the shift, and they walk. Not because you rejected them, but because you finally stopped rejecting yourself. Something unexpected happens when you integrate your shadow. You stop craving peace as a reward, and start embodying peace as a presence. You no longer seek safety in other people. You carry it inside you. You don't beg for respect. You command it silently, just by being fully yourself. Carl Jung believed that the unconscious parts of us attract the experiences we most need to evolve. And until we make peace with those parts, we repeat patterns. Same pain, different faces. But once you reclaim what you've repressed, your truth, your strength, your sacred no, you stop magnetizing chaos. Why? Because you're no longer vibrating with unresolved wounds. You're no longer a match for people who live in manipulation, drama, or power games. You no longer need to explain yourself. You feel safe enough to be misunderstood. You stop playing roles to survive. You start living in your truth, even when it's quiet, even when it's inconvenient. This is the inner transformation Jung pointed to. You become a whole psyche, and the world adjusts around that. Not because you're trying to change others, but because you finally stopped editing yourself. And from that moment on, toxic people don't know what to do with you, because the version of you they could control no longer exists. Toxic people thrive on your reaction. They test you, provoke you, poke at old wounds, just to see what still controls you. But when you've integrated your shadow, you don't flinch, you don't chase, you don't explain. You see the game, and you stay rooted. This is not about becoming cold or detached. It's about becoming conscious. Carl Jung taught that true power is not found in the ego, but in the self. The self is what emerges when you stop playing roles. It is the part of you that watches with clarity instead of reacting from old pain. And that's what makes you untouchable. Because once you stop being reactive, you become unpredictable. And unpredictability is terrifying to people who rely on control. You no longer give them what they expect: guilt, apology, compliance. You give them silence, presence, clarity. And in that space, they're forced to face themselves. But this shift isn't just about protecting yourself. It's about liberating yourself. You're no longer a prisoner to how others feel about you. You're no longer shaped by other people's chaos. You move through life not with defense, but with direction. Because when your energy no longer leaks through reaction, it flows through intention. This is what Carl Jung meant when he spoke of individuation. Becoming your true self, no longer at the mercy of the world around you. Something beautiful happens when you stop performing for approval and start living in alignment. Your presence begins to do the work your words never could. You don't need to convince anyone anymore. You don't need to beg to be seen. You don't need to explain your worth to people who refuse to recognize it. You simply are. Carl Jung believed that when a person integrates the shadow, they become a healing force. Not by fixing others, but by becoming whole themselves. And wholeness has a frequency. It says, I know who I am. I accept who I am. I no longer abandon myself to be loved. That kind of energy is powerful, not because it dominates, but because it doesn't need to. It creates space. It unsettles people who live in illusions. And it comforts those who are ready to be honest with themselves. This is why toxic people either pull away from you or transform in your presence. Not because you said the right thing, but because you embody something different. You are no longer a mirror for their games. You reflect something deeper, a call to truth. And those who aren't ready for truth, they'll leave. But those who are, they'll rise. That's the power of becoming who you were meant to be. You don't just protect your energy, you elevate the room. Let's be honest, becoming whole isn't easy. It's not a straight path. It's not always graceful. And it's definitely not comfortable. You'll grieve relationships that once defined you. You'll question the version of yourself that was built for survival. You'll sit in silence, wondering if you're doing the right thing, because everything familiar starts to fall away. This is the shadow work Carl Jung spoke of. It's not about becoming better, it's about becoming honest. And honesty hurts, because it peels away the masks you wore to feel safe. It strips away the roles you played to feel loved. But in that stripping, there's something else. Freedom. You realize you don't have to be agreeable to be worthy. You don't have to be self-sacrificing to be valuable. You don't have to explain your needs, your emotions, or your energy to people committed to misunderstanding you. You are not here to keep others comfortable. You are here to become fully yourself. And in doing so, you stop attracting chaos. You stop entering rooms that require your silence. You stop begging to belong in places that were never meant to hold you. The pain of this work is real. But the peace on the other side, it's unshakable. And once you taste that kind of inner safety, you'll never trade your authenticity for approval again. Here's the paradox. The more authentic you become, the more resistance you might face. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because you're no longer playing by the rules of fear. You speak less, but your silence says more. You explain less, but your energy speaks volumes. You show up as you are, and that alone challenges people who still wear masks. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But that privilege comes with a cost. You might lose friends who only loved the version of you that stayed small. You might trigger people who haven't faced their own truth. You might be labeled difficult, intimidating, or cold, but that's not your problem. Because you're no longer here to please. You're here to live aligned. And alignment is magnetic. It pulls in people who see you clearly. People who respect your boundaries. People who don't need you to shrink to feel secure. This is when you realize you don't need a crowd. You need clarity. You don't need to be understood. You need to be real. And realness is rare. It's disruptive. It's sacred. When you live in truth, you stop begging for peace. Because you are peace, and toxic people don't know what to do with that. So they disappear. Not because you forced them out, but because you finally walked back into your true self and locked the door behind you. Here's the final truth Carl Jung gifted us. There is no escaping the parts of yourself you deny. They will always find a way back through people, patterns, and pain. But when you choose to meet those parts with courage, when you welcome your shadow instead of running from it, you unlock a power that no toxic person can touch. This power isn't about control or dominance. It's about freedom. Freedom from fear. Freedom from judgment. Freedom from needing anyone else's permission to exist. Mastering this secret means becoming whole. Not perfect, not fixed, whole. And in wholeness, you find peace that no outside force can shake. So remember this. Toxic people will only have power over you as long as you deny yourself. But the moment you stand in your truth, they will fade away. Not because you fight them, but because you refuse to carry their weight anymore. Your journey isn't about avoidance. It's about integration. It's about becoming the person who commands respect, not with words, but with presence. This is your secret. This is your strength. And this is the path that will lead toxic people to leave your life on their own. Thank you for walking this journey today. If you're ready to continue growing with slow psychology, make sure to subscribe and join the community. Because the path to freedom always begins with one brave step inside.